A quiet, elegant dinner in one of the finest restaurants took a dramatic turn when a homeless African woman burst into the room shouting, "Don't eat it! Your wife poisoned the food!" The stunned Arab executive froze as everyone stared, unsure of what to believe. What happened next is a story of betrayal, courage, and a decision that would change lives forever. Before we dive into this gripping story of love, betrayal, and redemption, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories that inspire and leave you questioning everything. Let's begin. The restaurant buzzed with quiet chatter as waiters moved between tables, serving exquisite dishes on polished silver platters. It was a night of luxury, refinement, and routine for Khalid, a 42-year-old Arab executive known for his success and stoic demeanor. Seated at a corner table with his wife, Layla, Khalid was poised as ever, a man who radiated confidence and control. Layla, elegantly dressed in a flowing black gown, smiled as she poured wine into his glass. "To us," she said softly, her eyes sparkling under the golden light of the chandelier. Khalid nodded, lifting his glass in a gesture of agreement. But just as he brought the glass to his lips, a piercing voice shattered the calm. "Don't eat it! She poisoned the food!" All eyes turned to the entrance, where a disheveled African woman stood. Her hair was matted and her clothes were tattered, but her voice was strong and filled with desperation. Her dark eyes locked onto Khalid, pleading for him to listen. The room fell silent, the soft music from the piano fading into the background. Khalid lowered his glass slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied the woman. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with authority. The woman stepped forward, her bare feet making soft thuds against the polished floor. "My name doesn't matter," she said, her voice trembling. "But I know what's in your food. She put something in it to kill you." Gasps echoed through the restaurant. Layla's face turned pale, her hand gripping the edge of the table. "This is absurd," she said, her voice cracking with forced laughter. "She's a crazy woman off the streets. Security, remove her immediately." Two security guards approached the woman, but Khalid raised his hand to stop them. "Wait," he said, his voice firm. His gaze never left the woman. "How do you know this?" Tears welled up in the woman's eyes as she spoke. "I was near the alley behind the restaurant earlier today. I heard her talking to someone on the phone, telling them this was the night. I didn't understand at first, but then I saw her handing a small vial to the chef." Khalid's stomach churned as the words sank in. He looked at Layla, who now seemed frozen, her smile gone, replaced by a mask of fear. "This is ridiculous," Layla exclaimed, trying to regain control. "She's lying. She's just trying to ruin our evening." Khalid's mind raced. He glanced at the plate of food in front of him, then back at Layla. Her normally composed demeanor was cracking, her hands trembling ever so slightly. The woman's voice echoed in his mind, her desperation undeniable. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Call the chef," he ordered the staff. A few moments later, the chef appeared, his face pale and confused. Khalid gestured to the plate. "Did anyone ask you to do anything unusual with my meal tonight?" The chef hesitated, glancing nervously at Layla. "No, sir," he said quickly, but his voice wavered. "Look me in the eye and say that again," Khalid demanded, his tone cold and unrelenting. The chef shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know what she's talking about," he stammered. Khalid turned to the homeless woman. "Do you have proof?" Her shoulders slumped slightly, but her eyes burned with determination. "I don't need proof. I'm just trying to save your life. Please, believe me." The tension in the room was suffocating. Khalid looked at his wife. "Layla," he said quietly, his voice like steel, "tell me the truth." Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "Khalid, you're not seriously entertaining this nonsense, are you?" she said, her voice breaking. But Khalid saw it. The crack in her facade, the way her hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Without another word, Khalid picked up the plate and handed it to the chef. "Test this," he said firmly. "Now." The tension in the restaurant was unbearable. Khalid stood like a stone, his eyes fixed on Layla as she fidgeted in her chair. The homeless woman, still standing by the entrance, clasped her hands together tightly, her gaze bouncing between Khalid and the door to the kitchen. The murmurs of the other diners added a faint hum to the heavy silence. Moments later, the chef reappeared, holding a small test strip in one hand and Khalid's plate in the other. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a grim line. "Sir," the chef began, his voice trembling. "The food tested positive for traces of poison." Gasps filled the air as the weight of the revelation crashed down on everyone. Khalid's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. He turned his full attention to Layla, who now looked as though the floor beneath her might give way. "Layla," Khalid said, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Is this true?" Layla's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but there was none. Her lips trembled, and tears began to stream down her face. "Khalid, you don't understand," she stammered. "I had no choice." "No choice." Khalid's voice rose, echoing through the stunned room. "You tried to kill me, Layla. Why?" Layla broke down, sobbing into her hands. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she choked out. "I was desperate. They made me do it." "Who is they?" Khalid demanded, leaning forward, his voice icy. Layla hesitated, but the weight of his gaze forced her to speak. "The people I owe money to. They threatened me, Khalid. They said they'd destroy me, take everything I have if I didn't do this. I thought I could stop it at the last second." Khalid stepped back, his mind racing. He had always known Layla was struggling with her own demons, but he had never imagined it would come to this. Before he could respond, the homeless woman stepped forward, her voice steady and firm. "She's lying," she said, her eyes locked on Layla. "What are you talking about?" Layla snapped, her voice filled with desperation. The woman took another step closer, her hands clenched into fists. "I heard you, Layla. You weren't scared. You weren't desperate. You were angry. You said you'd had enough of living in his shadow, of being second to his business, his success. You wanted him gone so you could take everything." The room erupted into murmurs, but Khalid silenced them with a raised hand. His eyes bored into Layla, searching for the truth. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. Layla froze, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She didn't answer, but the look on her face said enough. Khalid's shoulders sagged, the weight of betrayal crashing down on him. He turned to the homeless woman. "What's your name?" "Amara," she said simply. "Why did you help me, Amara?" Khalid asked, his voice laced with both gratitude and confusion. Amara straightened her back, her voice steady. "Because no one else would. People like me, we see things others don't. And sometimes We do what's right, even if no one believes us. Khalid nodded slowly, his expression softening. You saved my life. The restaurant was now a mix of stunned silence and hushed whispers as the authorities arrived. Layla sat motionless, her face pale and her eyes void of the arrogance she once carried. Khalid, however, had his attention fixed on Amara, the woman who had saved his life against all odds. Amara, Khalid said again, his voice softer now, tinged with curiosity and gratitude. You risked everything to warn me. Tell me, what can I do to repay you? Amara hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her worn shawl. Her dark eyes, filled with a quiet strength, met Khalid's. I don't want your money, she said firmly. I didn't do this for a reward. Khalid nodded, respecting her words, but he wasn't ready to let it end there. Then tell me your story, he pressed. How did you end up here, in this place, watching over strangers? Amara looked away, her gaze distant as though she was staring into a past she had long tried to forget. I wasn't always like this, she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of pain. I was once a nurse. I had a family, a life I loved. But everything fell apart when my daughter got sick. Khalid listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. She had a rare illness, Amara continued, her voice trembling slightly. We didn't have the money for treatment. I sold everything, our house, my savings, but it wasn't enough. And when she passed, her voice broke and she paused, taking a deep breath. I lost everything, my job, my will to keep going. The streets became my home. Khalid's heart clenched. He had always been a man of means, a man who had worked hard, but never faced a tragedy so devastating. He couldn't imagine the strength it took for Amara to stand there now, still willing to help someone like him despite her own suffering. You didn't have to warn me, Khalid said, his voice low. Most people wouldn't have cared. Amara shrugged, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. When you lose everything, you see the world differently. You notice things people in their perfect lives ignore. I saw the way she acted, the tension in her face. I knew something wasn't right, and I couldn't just stand by. At that moment, the police officers approached Khalid, asking him to confirm the charges against Layla. Khalid glanced at his wife, who sat with her head bowed, her hands trembling. There was no more fight in her. Yes, he said quietly. Do what you need to do. As the officers led Layla away, she looked back at Khalid, her eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, she whispered, but Khalid remained silent. There was nothing left to say. Amara stared at Khalid, her lips slightly parted in disbelief. His words lingered in the air, carrying a weight she hadn't expected. Help me rewrite it, she repeated softly, as though unsure she'd heard him correctly. Yes, Khalid said, his voice steady and resolute. You saved my life tonight, Amara. The least I can do is give you a chance to rebuild yours. Amara's gaze faltered, her hands tightening around the edges of her tattered shawl. She had grown so accustomed to the cold indifference of the world that Khalid's offer felt almost unreal. Why would you do that for me? She asked, her tone laced with skepticism. Khalid's expression softened. Because you reminded me of something I've lost touch with. Humanity. People like me. We live in a bubble of wealth and power, blind to the struggles of others. But tonight, you showed me what true courage looks like. The sincerity in his voice made Amara's chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, but years of hardship had taught her to be wary of promises that sounded too good to be true. "What kind of help are you talking about?" she asked cautiously. Khalid smiled faintly. "The kind that doesn't come with strings attached. A place to stay. A chance to get back on your feet. I own a foundation that supports women in difficult circumstances. Let me connect you with the resources you need." Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," Khalid replied. "Just let me help." The restaurant staff began clearing the room as the remaining diners dispersed, still murmuring about the dramatic events of the evening. Khalid gestured for his driver, who pulled up to the entrance in a sleek black car. He opened the back door and turned to Amara. "Come with me," he said gently. Amara hesitated, glancing at the dark streets outside. For years, those streets had been her home, her prison, and her battleground. Stepping away from them felt like stepping into an entirely different world, one she wasn't sure she belonged in. I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice barely audible. Khalid placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "I'll be with you every step of the way." After a long moment of silence, Amara nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. The car ride was quiet, filled with an unspoken understanding between them. Khalid instructed his driver to take them to one of his properties, a transitional housing center for women. When they arrived, Amara's breath hitched. The building was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold streets she had grown used to. "This is where you'll stay," Khalid said as they stepped inside. "It's a safe place, with everything you need: food, clothing, medical care." Amara's legs felt weak as she took in the sight of the clean, well-lit interior. For the first time in years, she felt something she had thought was lost forever: hope. Amara awoke the next morning in a bed that didn't feel real, the soft sheets, the clean room, and the quiet hum of the world outside. It was a stark contrast to the cold, hard pavement she'd grown used to. For a moment she thought it was all a dream, but then the events of the previous night came flooding back. Khalid's kindness, his offer, the shelter. It was all real. She sat up slowly, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of everything. How had her life changed so drastically in just one night? Downstairs, Khalid was already waiting. He stood in the center of the living room, speaking with a woman who introduced herself as Layla, the director of the shelter. Layla smiled warmly at Amara as she entered the room. "Good morning, Amara," Layla said. "Khalid told me about everything you did last night. You're incredibly brave." Amara flushed, unsure how to respond. I couldn't stand by and do nothing," she murmured. "And that courage is what brought you here," Khalid added, his tone gentle but firm. "But now it's time to focus on you. Layla and her team are here to help you get back on your feet." Amara looked at Khalid, her eyes filled with doubt. "What if I don't know how to start?" Layla stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder. "We'll help you figure it out," she said. "The first step is letting yourself believe that you deserve this chance." Amara nodded slowly, her throat tight with emotion. For so long, she had felt invisible, as though the world had forgotten her. But now, standing here with Khalid and Layla, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Seen. Over the next few days, Amara began to settle into her new environment. The shelter provided her with fresh clothes, warm meals, and access to medical care. Layla worked closely with her, helping her outline a plan to rebuild her life. Khalid visited frequently, checking in on Amara's progress. Each time he arrived, he brought something new, a book he thought she might like, a journal to help her process her thoughts, or just a kind word to remind her that she wasn't alone. One afternoon, as they sat together in the shelter's garden, Amara turned to Khalid. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. Khalid leaned back in his chair, gazing at the flowers swaying in the breeze. "Because I see myself in you," he said after a long pause. "I may not have lived on the streets, but I've felt lost. I've made mistakes, hurt people I care about. Helping you, it's helping me find a purpose again." Amara studied him, seeing the vulnerability behind his words. For the first time, she realized that Khalid wasn't just a man of wealth and power, he was someone carrying his own scars. As the days turned into weeks, Amara's transformation became evident. She regained her confidence, her voice, and a sense of purpose. She began volunteering at the shelter, helping other women who were in the same position she once was. Khalid watched her with quiet pride, knowing that he had played a part in her journey. But as much as he had given to Amara, he felt that she had given him something even greater, a reminder of what truly mattered in life. Khalid gripped the phone tightly, his brow furrowing as the voice on the other end delivered shocking news. "Layla has been released on bail," the caller said, "and there are rumors she's planning something against you." The words hit Khalid like a punch to the gut. He had thought the ordeal with Layla was over, that justice would take its course and he could move on. But now, it seemed she wasn't done. He ended the call, his mind racing. Layla had already tried to take his life once. What was she planning now? For a brief moment, he considered keeping the news to himself, but then he thought of Amara. She deserved to know the truth, especially since her courageous act had brought them to this point. Later that evening, Khalid met Amara in the garden of the shelter. The stars above shone brightly, but the weight of the conversation ahead dulled the beauty of the night. "Amara," he began, his voice steady but grave, "there's something I need to tell you. Layla has been released." Amara froze, her eyes widening. "What? How is that possible?" "She's a resourceful woman," Khalid said bitterly, "and dangerous. I don't know what she's planning, but I want you to be careful." Amara's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I'm not afraid of her," she said, her voice resolute. "If she comes after you again, I'll do whatever it takes to stop her." Khalid couldn't help but smile faintly at her determination. "You've already done more for me than I could ever repay," he said softly. "But I promise you, I'll handle this. You've fought enough battles, Amara. Let me fight this one." The next few days were tense as Khalid worked to strengthen his security and gather more information about Layla's plans. Meanwhile, Amara continued her work at the shelter, refusing to let fear dictate her life. One afternoon, as Khalid visited the shelter, an envelope was delivered to him. Inside was a single note written in Layla's unmistakable handwriting. "This isn't over." Khalid felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Layla well enough to understand that she wasn't bluffing. But instead of fear, he felt a surge of resolve. He wouldn't let her destroy the new sense of purpose he had found, not for himself and not for Amara. The air in Khalid's study was heavy, filled with an uneasy silence as he stared at the crumpled note Layla had sent. "This isn't over." The words echoed in his mind like a warning, a reminder that her reach extended further than he had anticipated. For all the wealth, power, and influence Khalid possessed, This battle wasn't going to be won with money or connections. It was personal. Amara stood quietly by the window, her sharp eyes scanning the dark garden outside. The faint glow of the moon cast silver streaks over the shelter's grounds, making every shadow seem alive. "She won't stop until she feels like she's won," Amara said, breaking the silence. Khalid sighed, running a hand over his face. "She's always been relentless. It's how she survived in the circles we moved in, always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. But this time, she's crossed a line I can't ignore." Amara turned to face him, her expression firm. "Then let's make sure she doesn't get another chance." The next morning, Khalid called a meeting with his security team. The men gathered in the shelter's conference room, their serious faces reflecting the urgency of the situation. Khalid stood at the head of the table, his commanding presence filling the room. "We've confirmed that Layla was near the property last night," Khalid began, his voice steady. "She's already shown she's willing to go to extreme lengths, and I refuse to let her endanger anyone else. I want round-the-clock surveillance, not just here but at all my properties. If she tries anything, I want to know about it immediately." The men nodded, jotting down his instructions. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Rami, raised his hand. "Sir, do we have any intel on her current resources? Is she acting alone, or does she have help?" Khalid's jaw tightened. "That's what I need you to find out. Layla has connections, and she's not afraid to use them. But this time, we'll be ready." Amara, meanwhile, had thrown herself into her work at the shelter. She spent her days helping the women who sought refuge there, offering not just practical support, but the kind of empathy that only someone who had walked the same path could provide. But even as she focused on her role, a part of her remained on edge, always watching for any sign of Layla's next move. One evening, as she walked through the shelter's garden, she found Khalid sitting on a bench, staring at the sky. His usual composed demeanor seemed softer, almost vulnerable under the pale light of the moon. "You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders," Amara said, taking a seat beside him. Khalid chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "It feels that way sometimes," he admitted. "But more than anything, I just want this to be over. I want peace, not just for me, but for you and everyone here." Amara placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but reassuring. "We'll get through this," she said firmly. "You've already done so much for me, Khalid. Let me help you now." Khalid turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You've already helped me more than you know, Amara. You reminded me of what truly matters: human connection, compassion, and the strength to keep going even when it feels impossible." The moment between them was quiet, filled with an unspoken understanding that had grown stronger with each passing day. A few days later, everything came to a head. It was late evening when Khalid received a frantic call from one of his security guards stationed at the shelter's perimeter. "Sir, we've spotted Layla," the guard said. "She's outside the main gate demanding to see you." Khalid's heart sank. "Is she alone?" "She appears to be," the guard replied, "but we can't be sure." Khalid's instincts screamed at him to proceed with caution. "Keep her there," he ordered. "I'm on my way." Amara, who had overheard the call, stepped forward. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "No, Amara," Khalid said, his tone protective. "It's too dangerous." "I'm not letting you face her alone," Amara replied, her voice resolute. "We started this together, and we'll finish it together." Khalid hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Stay close to me," he said. When they arrived at the gate, Layla was standing just outside, her arms crossed and her expression defiant. She looked different from the composed, elegant woman Khalid once knew. Her hair was disheveled and her eyes burned with a mix of anger and desperation. "Khalid!" she called out as he approached, her voice dripping with venom. "How noble of you to come out and face me. And I see you've brought your little sidekick." Her eyes flicked to Amara with a sneer. "What do you want, Layla?" Khalid asked, his tone cold. Layla laughed bitterly. "What do I want? I want everything you took from me, Khalid. My life, my status, my dignity. You destroyed it all." "You destroyed it yourself," Khalid shot back. "You made your choices, Layla. No one else." Her expression darkened, and she took a step closer. "And now I'm making another choice," she said. "To make you pay." Before anyone could react, Layla pulled a small object from her pocket, a vial filled with a clear liquid. "Layla, don't!" Khalid shouted, stepping forward. But before she could do anything, Amara moved faster than anyone expected. She lunged forward, grabbing Layla's wrist and twisting it, forcing her to drop the vial. It shattered on the ground, the liquid seeping into the dirt. The guards rushed in, restraining Layla as she struggled and screamed. "You'll regret this, Khalid," she spat, her voice filled with rage. Khalid stood still, his chest heaving as he processed what had just happened. He turned to Amara, who was breathing heavily but stood tall, her expression unwavering. "You saved me again," Khalid said, his voice filled with both gratitude and awe. Amara shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I guess it's becoming a habit." Layla was taken into custody, and this time, Khalid ensured there would be no loopholes or second chances. As the dust settled, he and Amara returned to the shelter, the adrenaline slowly giving way to relief. Sitting together in the quiet of the garden, Khalid turned to Amara. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" she asked. "For being you," Khalid replied. "For your courage, your strength, and for reminding me of what it means to fight for something that truly matters." Amara smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You've given me a second chance at life, Khalid. The least I can do is make sure you have yours." With Layla out of the picture, Khalid and Amara focused on the future. Amara became a pillar of strength at the shelter, her story inspiring countless women to believe in their own resilience. Khalid, meanwhile, expanded his foundation, dedicating resources to helping those who had been overlooked by society. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, a testament to the power of compassion, trust, and shared purpose. Together, they proved that even in the face of betrayal and darkness, hope and humanity could shine through. If this story moved you, remember that courage and kindness can change lives. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video to inspire others. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.